I'm Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Call to Coach with special guest Jacque Merritt, recorded November 20th, 2013. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions or comments or contributions during the show, we do have a live chat room available for you. It's available right below the main video window. And if you're listening to the recorded version, you can email us those questions, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video in both now streaming and downloadable audio for offline listening to past shows and this show next Wednesday. It's all available at coaching.gallup.com. Jeremy Petrosini is our host today. Jeremy works as a learning and development consultant with Gallup here on the riverfront. Actually, we were all on the riverfront today. It's good to be together. Jeremy, great to see you, and welcome to Call to Coach.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, together but not together, right? So we get to see each other virtually. So, guys, I'm excited for today. Again, if you're new to Call to Coach, we're excited to have you here. Again, this live broadcast is something we do with part of our passion to want to see over 1 billion people discover and really kind of make their strengths come to life. And so we're excited today, as part of this vision to empower coaches around the world. Again, part of our mission is in reaching those 1 billion people. We believe that we need at least 1 million coaches, strength coaches, that are aligned with us and partnering with us on that same mission. And so we're excited today to have Jacque Merritt, who works full-time with Gallup as an executive coach, senior practice consultant. Jacque's been with Gallup over 25 years and really spends her days doing what she does best, which is helping CEOs, leaders, managers really maximize and their talents' effectiveness by providing insights and developing their capabilities. So, Jacque, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jeremy.
So, Jacque, there's so much I want to dive into today. Many of the people that have been through any of our courses have heard from you, some of the other Gallup coaches, with best practices and examples of kind of what coaching actually looks like in action, challenges, successes. And you have obviously so much history to bring too, but start off just telling us a little bit about your journey, and probably not just your journey to being a strength coach, but your journey to Gallup. And then obviously within Gallup, there's so many opportunities of what you could spend your day doing, but why you kind of fell into that niche of focusing on strengths and helping executives kind of learn and develop theirs and those of them around them.
Yeah, absolutely. Funny thing is, because we hire people to fit their jobs. I have been in the same job for 25 years, and for a lot of people that probably doesn't sound like it's very growth-provoking, but for me it's absolutely been an incredible journey.
Since you were 7, right?
Yeah.
You were 7 when you started.
Actually, if I go back to when I'm 7, it kind of explains why I'm here today. So I used to have this crazy obsession with chimpanzees.
Okay.
And my mom used to take me to the zoo, and I used to be fascinated by their behavior, and I could watch them all day long. And so I grew up wanting to be like Jane Goodall and go out in the jungles of Africa and study chimps and be a researcher and come to all these, great theories about chimpanzees. So I actually went into a doctoral program in animal behavior. And during the process, I found that we studied a lot about general animal behavior, like why do chimpanzees behave as they do, or why do ground squirrels communicate this way. But for me, what was more fascinating was kind of the individual animal. And I guess that really came to life for me. I actually went to Africa and worked in Congo with chimpanzees in a primate sanctuary. And when I got there, there were 50 chimps. And these were chimps that had been orphaned as babies and then raised in people's houses. And so our job was kind of the reverse of the Tarzan. So we had to try to rehabilitate them to be real chimpanzees again, instead of wanting to wear clothes and eat chocolate and watch TV. And because there were 50 of them, it was really hard to tell them apart. But after a while, I started to watch, the individual behavior, and they interacted with each other very differently. So one may have been friends with another one, and they kind of go off in their little clan, and the way they walked, the way they moved, the way they communicated, the way they looked, they were all such unique individuals. And I began to be able to kind of predict what they were going to do. And I learned their names pretty quickly. And that kind of was one of those aha moments for me that made me realize that I really was more interested in individuals. And somehow, you know, I landed at Gallup through a woman that I met through my social network who talked to me about the way that Gallup studied individuals. And for me, that kind of sparked. And so it was just a process of going through our interview and kind of landing here and then looking around and thinking, this is what I was longing for all along. So that was the start of the journey.
Yeah, cool.
You know, back then, if you think about where we were as a company, we really didn't do a lot of developmental work. A lot of our work was in selection. And so I spent a lot of time on the phone just listening to people talk about their talents. We had questions that we would ask them to try to surface what those talents were, because we knew that different people answered the questions differently.
And Jackie, who did we study? Did we study the best, the worst, all across the board? Where was the time focus for you and others?
Yeah, our philosophy was always to study the best, to listen to how the best talk differently. And, you know, when you ask people questions, you learn what talent looks like. You know, it might be, we studied people in positions from the characters that dress up like Mickey Mouse at Disney, engineers to lawyers to nurses in hospitals, teachers. You know, we put together a catalog of thousands and thousands of talents that we identified. I know the Strengths Finder is looking at a subset of 34 that's kind of a composite of that, but we really believe that there are more human talents, you know, left to be discovered.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's a unique piece that you actually got to not only hear or read quotes from Don Clifton, right, but that you were actually hearing him say these things in the office over lunch. What was the vision he had that even kind of led to the development of Strength Finder, and how did you see that launch of that tool just become transformational to your ability to help managers and leaders?
Yeah, so if you think back to when the Strengths Finder first came out, it was about 1998. So they started developing it in about 1997. And if you think back even at that time, we had already studied about 45,000 people. And so Don had been in this business for 30 years of talent and what makes people tick and what makes people unique. And in that process, he was always interested in how does that relate to outcomes. You know, people who are in jobs where they get to use their talent and their strengths, you know, are they happier? Are they more motivated? Are they more productive? Are they more engaged? Do they have better well-being? And he found correlations there and relationships there, so that people who were using their talents, who were the most successful in their jobs, who knew what their strengths were, they came to work every day being more engaged, and that led to more productivity, better outcomes for organizations. And so we really spent a lot of time trying to help people get into the right jobs where they could do what they do best. So by 97, like I said, we'd already studied about 45,000 people. So he had a lot of theories about, you know, how to use this to impact people's lives and to impact businesses. And, you know, the Strengths Finder, I think, emerged at that time because that's really when the technology emerged. So his dream was that there's all these problems in the world, right, that we can't solve, whether it's conflict in the Middle East or poverty. You know, over 1 billion people wake up every day hungry, and how do you address some of those biggest problems in the world? And in Don's thought, it was about people waking up every day and feeling engaged and feeling like they could use their strengths. And I know that feels maybe like a stretch or too idealistic to some people to imagine that, you know, we could crack some of those nuts with human talent. But I really, through my experience, believe pretty consistently with Don's vision that, you know, if we get to a tipping point in the world, you know, Connie Rath, Don's daughter, says if we get to a tipping point where 5% of the people in the world really know and understand their strengths and have somebody investing in their strengths in the right jobs, we can tackle some of those big problems and really, change the dynamics in the world. And, I had an opportunity early on using the Strengths Finder. Like, for me, maybe originally I was one of those people who thought, how can a machine do a better job than me, right?
Yep.
Figuring out what a person...
I'm the strength finder, right?
So I was probably one of those original skeptics. But for me, it really came to life early on. So like maybe 1989, the year 2000, I was invited to do some work with the United Nations at their International Leadership Academy. And so what they would do is in Amman, Jordan, they would invite a lot of world leaders together around a particular topic. And one of the first topics I got to work with was conflict resolution.
Okay.
And so at that time in history, we had a lot of conflict in the Middle East, East Timor, Northern Ireland, and they brought people from both sides of the conflict together into the same room. And so my job as a coach was to work with each of those people individually to help them explore their strengths and what makes them unique as a leader. And then we did a session as a collective group. There was about 20 people in the room.
And remind us of your top 5 too, so we can kind of envision that, how you went in as a coach with this.
And what's funny is I don't know my top 5 in the right order. So I'm just going to throw them out there, and I'll talk a little bit about it because I've learned to live with that, because I thought you might ask me that. But I have woo and connectedness, maximizer, input, and focus.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's not in that order. I'm getting it wrong every time because I don't think about it like that. But at the Leadership Academy, so they had all these people in the room. They got to explore their strengths together, talk about, what makes them unique. And there was a point where they were talking about a particular issue. I think it was an issue in Northern Ireland. Okay. And one of the guys got very upset, and his temper came out. And he slammed the desk with his fist. And he got very angry. And he stood up and he walked out of the room. And there was so much tension in the room at that point. And you could see why they could never come to agreement on this issue. But then somebody in the group remembered what his strengths were. And they reminded us, and it cut the tension in the room. So he had command and empathy. And when he was talking about his strengths earlier, he said that there are, the times when he gets very directive and he takes control and he wants people to him. And his empathy creates so much feeling and so much passion that he just kind of blows up. And, he calls it dropping a bomb, not literally, but he calls it dropping a bomb. And so then he'd walk out. And I think through that experience, when people started talking about, oh, yeah, that's who he is, he knows that's who he is, they began to forgive him for who he was. And so when he came back in the room, there wasn't any tension at all. They kind of embraced him as a human being, even though they may not agree with his side of the issue. They saw him as a human being. And I think for me, that's what is the power of our Strengths Finder. Is it allows people to look at each other through their different lenses on the world and understand that that's just who they are. It has nothing to do with where they stand on the issue. It's more to do with how they see the world. And I thought that understanding and forgiveness, if you could create that, whether that's in the workplace, with relationships, whether that's when you're trying to negotiate conflict, I just think for me that was one of those aha moments that really brought to life for me what the power of strengths.
So obviously, the majority of people listening in today are coaches. So for them to have the opportunity to hear from you as one of our best, and I love the story here of just seeing the transformation, the reality that strengths can bring, the appreciation. What are some tips and tricks that you've kind of learned over the years that you've seen be effective to really just kind of begin to kind of build that coaching trust relationship with your clients?
I have a lot of them. I have labels for my tips.
Okay.
and I've gotten these from a million different sources.
Yep.
I'll just say I'm very homegrown here at Gallup, obviously being here 25 years. So I've never been formally trained, but I have high input. So I'm constantly reading. I'm constantly, listening to what other great coaches do. So these are all, borrowed and probably stolen from other people.
And then our training kits are built off what we've stolen from you. So.
Uh-oh.
You are what we're reproducing. So.
People will have to modify them for their own strengths, right? Let's see. One of them, I've got a lot of them, but one of them, think big, act small. And I actually wrote a little blog on that a couple of weeks ago. But think big, act small for me, really, I can give stories about how that comes to life for some of the people that I coach, but it's that concept of, everybody I coach has some big, hairy, audacious goal or some big dilemma in their life that they're trying to solve, or in their business that they're trying to solve. So they want to transform their company to be more customer-centric, or they want to transform their life to have more time with their kids.
Right.
And so when you put that big thing on the table, it feels so onerous. Like, how are you going to get inside of that? How are you going to tackle that? And the act small part is, I do believe that as coaches, our role is to help a person surface, just one thing that they could do that would make a difference. And it might be something really silly. It might be something that we don't think is very grandiose, but for them to make one small, slight shift in their can have spillover effects into everything else. And I'll give you an example of that. This is probably more of one. It's not the one I wrote about is more of a CEO trying to transform his company. But the one I'll give you is a little more about somebody's personal life, which was a gentleman that I coach in Saudi Arabia. Actually, the majority of people I coach are in Saudi Arabia, which is interesting because they're all men, of course. But he has, if I lay out his strengths, he was, competition, maximizer, significance, self-assurance, I think arranger, something like that. And so he's pretty work-oriented. Success is very important to him in his life, and he has spent his life becoming a very successful leader. And he had an experience that he shared with me one day. He said that he had to go pick his son up from school for some reason his wife wasn't available with the driver to go do that. And when he showed up, they wouldn't let him pick his son up because they didn't know who he was. And they wanted to see an ID, and he had to go through this administrative to get his son from school. And it was one of those moments for him where he looked at himself and he thought, I don't want to be that kind of dad.
Right.
And I don't know if that was his significance or what was kicking in there, but for him, it was one of those situations where he had to look at his life and think about, I'm spending all my time with my work, and that's how my success is defined, but how is my family suffering, and will I ever get that time back? And so we talked through that, and it seemed really huge for him to tackle that, because he didn't want to be unsuccessful at work. That was how he measured himself. And so to back off from that would have cost him a lot. So we really tried to leverage who he was and leverage his strengths. So he led with a lot of maximizer. And maximizer is about, quality versus quantity, really. How do you optimize things? And so we thought through his day, we thought through his time. And the one thing he could come up with is that he was going to join his son for a bowl of cereal in the morning. That was the one thing he could manage, he thought. And so I coached him a month later, and I always give people a little bit of homework, and then it's not called homework, but I give them something to do, something to try, some kind of thing that maybe they're experimenting with, and then we come back to the next coaching session and we say, how did that go? And he was a completely different person in that next coaching session. It had made such a difference. And not just a difference that he was more engaged with his son, but he was more engaged with his family. He had set a vacation so that his family could go away together, and he hadn't done that in a long time. He was getting closer to his daughter. He showed up at his son's games, and it was all because all of a sudden he started to engage his son in conversation in the morning and began learning about all these things that were happening in his life that he didn't know about before. And it might seem small for a lot of people, but I think it was big and transformational for him.
Yeah, no, I love the example, because I think we hear coaches talking about helping somebody discover their top 5, but how do we apply it? You know, obviously even the terminology we use of kind of that process of you need to help them name it, then claim it and really own it, and then aim it at something. And I think we sometimes forget that even a simple little thing, and especially when it's personal to them, if that's an area of passion, that's where we're going to see a win. And I know you lead that way a lot, where sometimes we want to jump into as coaches to the tell me about your themes and, you know, what is it that you need to tackle. I love that you often will talk about leading with, opening with letting them talk about success or what they're most passionate about, and just how it kind of leads to, I'm sure with this scenario too, you probably didn't lead with tell me about your kids, you know, but
right.
You know, you got there and were able to leverage that in a way that was very meaningful for him. So, yeah. Jim, do we have, I know there's a lot going on in chat. Are there questions that people have for Jacque at this point?
You know, Jacque, I've got a question for you, in the sense we have these coaches here this week going through training, and we see this a lot in chat. And so with brand new coaches, you've been doing this a long time. If you were going to give somebody advice, you know, they just went through our training, or they're thinking about coaching, or they're coaching informally, maybe they haven't had any formal training. What advice, like what one piece of advice would you give to a brand new coach or someone who's thinking about coaching that would get them started, or what kind of things have you learned?
I think a really simple one is just to have a goal for every coaching session that you do. So it's something that you're thinking about that the person needs to learn, or an aha that they need to have, or there's something that you want them to discover. And I think that helps to create a destination for where you're going. Like, I'll give you my kind of analogy of it. So I think about our strengths, and this is probably not going to work for anybody but me, right? Because I've told it to other people, and they're like, uh-huh. But I think that strengths are like the car that you're driving in, right? So some people get a Prius, and some people get the Dodge Ram, and I have a Hyundai. Some people drive Toyotas. You know, whatever it is, your strengths are your car that you're driving in, and you can upgrade your car, right? You can get new tires, you can put in different fuel, you can clean your windshield on a, you know, cloudy day or whatever, but you can always figure out how to get higher performance out of that car, but you're driving in your car. But everybody's got to have a road that they're traveling on and a destination that they're going. Otherwise, you're just going to wander around. So in coaching, I try to get people not only discover what their car is like and how to get the highest performance out of their car, but how to get their car on the right road that's going to get them where they want to be, that's going to get them to the end of that journey point. And so I think it's really important to define where that client wants to go, what, you know, just asking that simple question at the beginning, you know, well, hey, what do you want to get out of this coaching session? You know, and I probably don't lead with that first off. You know, I have woo, so I tend to try to get that relationship established first and make them feel comfortable with me as a person, and, you know, have that little kind of warm-up comfort chat first and say, hey, what's going on? So it may be 10 minutes into it that I'm saying, well, you know, let's stand back from this for a minute. Tell me, what do you want to get out of this coaching session? You know, and if I've been working with them for a while, I have a goal too. But if I'm new and this is my first session with a person, you know, I'm going to let them lead that. You know, where do you want to go with this coaching session? Because then in my head, I can think about what car they're in, where they want to get to, what are some of the alternative routes that they might get there. But I always try to remember too that you can't tell people what they should do. Yeah, I mean, we know this from being parents, right? They
Yes.
kind of have to
Yes.
come.
Yes.
They have to come
Resounding
to it
yes.
on their own. Yeah.
They do.
I know the other day my daughter was trying to think about a topic for her paper at school, and I was so excited about it. I was like, well, you could do this or you could do that. You could write it about this or that. And she looked at me and she said, Mom, those are all great ideas, but they're your ideas. And I was actually, that was one of my ideas, but now that you said it, I can't do it.
Oh. That's too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jackie, Kath BDLS asked this. Would you say there's a top 5 strengths that you should have to be a good coach, or can anyone with any set of strengths become a coach?
Probably 2 different answers. So, no, there's not a top 5 set that would predict that you would be a great coach. But yes, there's probably certain types of strengths applied in a certain way that would be better for coaching than other jobs, right? So, funny factoid is going back, 15 years into the original design of the Strengths Finder is that we tried to, we didn't know what the Strengths Finder was going to be, right? So it could have ended up as a selection tool rather than a development tool. But when you think about looking for a certain group of strengths, like a top 5, statistically it ended up being like a needle in a haystack. So if you say, okay, to be a great coach, you have to have these 5 strengths, it's going to be like a 1 in 275,000 chance that you're going to meet somebody who has those top 5 strengths. So it is a needle in a haystack if you're going at the theme level. And while I'm on that strengths question, or strengths matching thought, we did try to originally think about the Strengths Finder as a matching tool for couples. And we have a lot of people at Gallup who are married to each other. So one of the early things we did is try to figure out if the overlap of strengths that can predict, what type of people actually end up together. But apparently, in order to make that a really good study, you had to figure out whose marriages were really successful and whose weren't, and that was just like way too far off the reservation for us to go, so we didn't do that. But back to the question, I think that if you're thinking about coaching, you've got to maybe ask yourself some questions around, do I enjoy listening more than talking? Because I think that's what you do a lot of in a coaching session is you spend about 80% of your time listening. Mm-hmm. You're asking really good questions to facilitate discoveries, but it's not a role where you're presenting ideas to people. It's very different than some of our consulting roles at Gallup. And I know a lot of people at Gallup who would hate coaching, because they wouldn't get to do the talking. So I think you have to ask yourself that. You have to ask yourself, can I feel successful through other people's success? Do I like people? Am I curious about people do what they do? So I think it's, I think people self-select into it for a lot of different reasons. But I've worked with some of my clients who, as a retirement job, some of them think, well, I'll go into coaching because I'm the expert on this industry and I've got a lot of advice to give. I'm going to become a coach. And then they discover through that process that, no, they probably aren't a great coach. They're probably a better consultant, a better advisor, maybe a better mentor than a coach.
Yeah, and Jackie, I'll echo that too. I think that question comes up a lot, not just with coaching, but I know even when we wrote Strength-Based Leadership, people wanted to know what are the best top 5 of a CEO. And again, you do a lot of coaching, so you see a lot of different combinations of themes, and oftentimes there's patterns, but there's not a set formula. And I love, again, when we published that book, the whole idea was a great leader surrounds himself with others that complement their strengths and talents versus just trying to fit, a certain niche where they have to be strategic and have strategic thinking themes. I think you're saying the same thing about coaching. I know in the coaching course, I mentioned at the start of the call, there were 25 individuals here this week in Omaha being certified as strength performance coaches, and it was really interesting and just fun to hear them talk about their top 5. And somebody who has command high says, "I love those resistant senior executives that don't think they need help," and somebody else is like, "I never want to talk to them." Now both can be successful coaches, but I think, like you said, that you need to figure out your approach. For you, it's woo right away and trying to soften that relationship. For others, it might be a complete different approach based on their themes and how they get there, or the types of clients they really enjoy working with.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I think, you say woo right away. Well, I learned the hard way that sometimes that doesn't work, right?
Talk about that a little bit. I know you've talked about that with a CEO who, was more senior than you, had been around, maybe a little skeptical to coaching, and who are you, 20 years younger than me, to tell me what to do? Tell that story a little bit, because I think that's a good example of being aware of our themes of when it might even backfire on us a little bit. But
yeah, this was a number of years ago. I probably even had braces on my teeth or something, but hopefully I've learned that lesson. But I remember, I could remember this so vividly, because sometimes you remember the embarrassing moments in your life more than others. But I walked into a coaching session with an executive, and she was about 20 years my senior, Asian woman, very established in the community, very prominent, very graceful, very poised, very professional. And I came in with all of my bubbly woo, and woo, I think, sometimes makes you feel that you're more familiar with people than you really are.
Right.
And I went in kind of like that, with very transparent, sometimes boundaryless, and just kind of jumping into the conversation. And she complained about me after that coaching session. She went to, it was in a leadership program. She went to one of the people that was running the program and said she found me very unprofessional. And that it was not comfortable for her. And I really, at that time, I had to think about, I think about the concept of gravitas. I love that word. It's gravity. What gives you gravity as a coach? What gives you that center where you can establish credibility with a client?
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's my input. So I read a lot. I have a lot of information at my fingertips, sometimes just the way I file it in my brain. And I think I had to turn up the volume on that strength to establish that credibility with her, where she could see me as an expert. She could see me as somebody that could help her. And I think when I came in with the woo turned up too high, we used the terminology at Gallup, I was in the basement with that theme. So being in the basement means it's dark. You're letting that theme out without really recognizing what's going on around you. And I needed to get that theme up on the balcony where I could use it with full knowledge of the audience that I was playing to. And it really taught me that I have to match my strengths to my audience. So if I've got somebody who's high competition, high activator, I got to be on my toes, and I got to be fast, and I got to be about winning and helping them to figure out how they win. If I'm talking to somebody who's very analytical, it might be somebody who's more of a critical thinker, might be a little bit more skeptical about what the StrengthsFinder is telling them, and needs a little bit of background to buy into it and understand that it's had a lot of research behind it. So I've really learned the hard way to kind of tweak my strengths to fit who I'm talking to.
Jeremy, let's do one more question.
Yeah,
we're running. We'll run a little bit over, so if you're joining us live, hang tight. One more question, actually asked by Jane Jenkins. She was our guest last time on Call to Coach, and had a really great question. So she asked, when a client isn't focused and is all over the place in terms of changes they want to make, what is your best strategy to help them focus?
Pretend you were coaching me.
or me.
You're high focus, I'm not. Yeah.
So when a client is all over the place in terms of what they want to accomplish, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. When they're just they're unfocused, want to do a whole bunch of different things.
I think that let me step back just philosophically. I'll answer that first. Like, I think some people live their life enjoying the process of discovering their life one step at a time. Like, their life emerges for them, and they don't preset it, right? They don't stretch out and put that stake in the ground and say, I'm going to, have this much money in the bank when I'm 30, and I'm going to be a vice president when I'm 45. They don't have that narrowing, because for them it feels like narrowing. Some people they like to have a wide scope. They like to think about their life as all these different doors that you could open. And they like that undiscovered country, or that feeling of emergence. And so I'm not going to judge that. Just because I have focus, I'm not going to say, well, you need to be focused, right? And you need to have goals, and you need to figure out what your priorities are. So I try to keep that in mind, keep my own focus biases out of that. But if that person, to answer that question, Jane, I think I try to get them to just go that one step at a time. So rather than having them stretch their horizon out into the future and think about it on a bigger playing field, I just have them think about, what's one thing you could do that would solve this situation, or what's one thing you could do that would have the greatest impact right now. And I just try to narrow it down to that. And then, maybe that's what they're going to try and trial over the next month before we meet again.
Well, and I think that circles back, Jackie, well, to your example earlier with that one senior executive, to say if it's breakfast, with your kid, and one simple little slight shift, he may have had a list of 50,000 things, and they were all that I'm going to be the best dad in the world tomorrow, and you focused it in to just say, here's one simple thing to do, that, like you said, the next time you guys spoke, it began to transform who he was. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jeremy, do we bring this in for a landing?
Yeah, we can wrap, and then if there are other post-show questions or.
You bet. Listening live, I'll remind you, stay around for a few minutes. We try to keep this to 35, 40 minutes for the recorded portion of the show. We're going to ask Jackie to stay around for a few minutes after the show. We've got some more questions for her as well, and so hang tight. If you have to go, we record most of this, but the advantage is to staying around for the live show as you get the post show. So we also want to remind everyone to take full advantage of the resources we have available out of the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just gallupstrengthscenter.com. Send us your questions or comments, or if you'd like to be a guest blogger, we are looking at those as well. We've picked up many over the last couple of weeks, so we appreciate that. Send us an email and just put guest blogging in the title and send it to coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this show and all the past ones. Jane was just on the last one. You can head out to our page, coaching@gallup.com. On that page as well are all our links to Facebook and our YouTube site as well if you want to join us over there. Be sure to subscribe to Call to Coach on our YouTube channel while you're there, and we want to thank Jackie for coming out with us today. Jeremy, what do we have coming up in January for Call to Coach?
Yeah, so we are going to continue this cadence of twice a month live Call to Coach. Again, as Jim mentioned, all the calls are recorded as well, and have a good kind of slew of people lined up in regards to kind of a mix of external coaches, Gallup champions, internal thought leaders from Gallup. And I want to continue to encourage you too. I know Jim said this with the chat, but you can also, with that coaching@gallup.com, continue to let us know what are those best moments, what are the great questions that you love hearing from coaches, or the type of coaches you want to hear from. And that way, as we're getting further into the year too, we can continue to customize that for you.
Yeah, the number one question I get all the time as well is, how do I get automatically notified when these Call to Coach events are going to be? And a super easy mechanism, if you're on Facebook, you can just join us out there. Just search for Call to Coach. I'll throw the link in the chat as well, and it's also on our coaching.gallup.com page. Join us there, and I create an event for every single one of these that you can do. Or you can go out to gallup.eventbrite.com as well, and again, all those will be listed out there as well. So there's plenty of ways to make sure you know what's going on with us. Stay around for the post show. Your questions and comments live from chat. Goodbye, everyone.